In 1928, a tin miner in central Nigeria dug up a small terracotta head buried deep in the soil. It was strange, stylized, unlike anything found in Africa before, and it was old, far older than anyone expected. What that miner had accidentally uncovered was the first trace of a civilization that had been smelting iron, casting sculpture, and building complex societies over 1,000 years before Rome ever laid its first road. And for decades, almost nobody outside Nigeria had heard of it. This is the story of the Nok. Named after the small village where that first terracotta was found, the Nok culture flourished across a vast stretch of what is now central Nigeria, an area roughly the size of Portugal. They left behind no written records, no royal inscriptions, no king lists. What they left behind instead was clay, iron, and silence. And it's taken archaeologists nearly a century to start piecing together who they actually were. The Nok civilization's roots stretch back further than most people assume. Evidence now suggests settlement in the region as early as 1500 BCE, with the culture fully flourishing by around 900 BCE and continuing for well over 1,000 years into the early centuries CE. That timeline alone is worth sitting with. While the classical world was still building the foundations of Greek city-states, communities in central Nigeria were already organizing complex, settled societies capable of large-scale craft production. Early Nok settlements were agricultural communities growing pearl millets and other staple crops, supporting populations dense enough to sustain specialized labor, meaning not everyone farmed. Some people spent their time doing something else entirely, making iron and making art. Here's what makes the Nok genuinely remarkable and the reason we're covering them at all. Around 280 BCE, verified through radiocarbon dating of charcoal found inside excavated furnaces, the Nok were smelting iron, not experimenting with it. Smelting it at scale in purpose-built furnaces capable of reaching the extreme temperatures needed to extract usable iron from raw ore. And here's the detail that really separates them from almost every other early civilization on Earth. The Nok appear to have skipped the Bronze Age entirely. Most ancient societies, Egypt, Mesopotamia, China, even other parts of Africa, moved through a long transitional period of copper and bronze tools before eventually mastering the much higher heat and skill required for iron. The Nok, as far as the archaeological record currently shows, went almost directly from stone tools to iron, a leap that required serious, independently developed metallurgical knowledge, not a slow inherited transition. At the site of Taruga, archaeologists uncovered over a dozen iron smelting furnaces clustered together, alongside terracotta fragments found inside and around the furnaces themselves, suggesting the act of smelting wasn't purely industrial. It may have carried ritual or spiritual weight, the terracotta figures possibly serving as guardians or offerings tied to the transformative, almost magical process of turning rock into metal. This iron technology mattered enormously. Beyond weapons, iron tools, hoes, blades, axes dramatically improved farming capacity, clearing land and working soil in ways stone tools simply couldn't match. In other words, the Nok's technological leap likely fed their population growth, which in turn fed their art and their trade. If iron was the Nok's technological signature, terracotta was their cultural one. Nok sculptures are now recognized as among the earliest large-scale figurative art produced anywhere in sub-Saharan Africa. Life-size and near life-size human heads and figures, alongside animal forms, rendered with striking stylized detail. Elongated features, elaborate hairstyles and beading, pierced pupils, and expressive, almost haunting faces. These weren't crude figures. The level of craftsmanship, proportion, texture, facial expression shows generations of accumulated artistic tradition, not a single lucky discovery. Some archaeologists believe the sculptures may represent ancestors, deities, or rulers. Others suggest they were tied to funerary or fertility rituals. Without written records, we're largely inferring meaning from form, but the sophistication itself isn't in dispute. Tragically, the same qualities that make knock terracottas so remarkable have also made them a target. Because Nigeria's antiquities laws and site protections have historically struggled against looting, thousands of knock pieces have been illegally excavated and smuggled out of the country over the decades, sold into private collections and auction houses abroad, stripped of the archaeological context that would tell us exactly where and with what they were originally found. Every looted piece is a permanently lost chapter of this civilization's story, because there's no writing to draw from. Reconstructing Nok society means reading between the lines of the physical evidence. The sheer geographic spread of the culture, tens of thousands of square kilometers, combined with the concentration of smelting sites and terracotta production centers, suggests a network of interconnected communities, rather than one single city or capital. Some researchers describe it less as a single unified kingdom, and more as a shared cultural and technological tradition, spread across many settlements, bound together by trade, craft specialization, and possibly shared belief systems, even without centralized political control in the way we'd recognize from Egypt or Rome. This raises a genuinely important question for how we think about civilization itself. Does it require a king, a capital, a written language? Or can a civilization exist as a widespread, technologically advanced culture without any of those things? The Nok challenged the narrow definition often taught in Western textbooks, one that quietly, historically, excluded much of sub-Saharan Africa from the label civilization altogether. Then, around 200 CE, the archaeological record shows something happening. A sharp, fairly abrupt drop in terracotta and iron production across Nok sites. And just like that, the trail goes cold. Nobody knows for certain why. Leading theories include overexploitation of natural resources. Iron smelting requires enormous quantities of charcoal, meaning centuries of continuous production may have driven serious deforestation and soil depletion. Others point to climate shifts affecting agriculture, the pressures of rival groups moving into the region, or some combination of environmental and social stress compounding at once. Unlike Great Zimbabwe or Benin, where we at least have oral history, later written accounts, or surviving descendant institutions to draw from, the Nok simply go quiet in the archaeological record, with no single conclusive explanation for why. So why haven't more people heard of the Nok, given how genuinely remarkable this civilization was? Part of it is the absence of monumental architecture. No great stone walls, no pyramids, nothing that survives visibly above ground the way Zimbabwe's ruins or Egypt's monuments do. Ancient civilizations without dramatic standing structures have historically been undervalued and understudied, regardless of how advanced their actual technology or art may have been. Part of it too is simply funding and access. Decades of political instability, underfunded heritage protection, and difficulty securing research permits have slowed Nigerian archaeology considerably compared to more heavily studied ancient regions. Combined with the ongoing loss of on-provenance artifacts to the black market, an enormous amount of what could be known about the Nok may already be permanently unrecoverable. What we do know is enough to matter. More than 2,000 years ago, in what's now central Nigeria, a widespread culture mastered iron, smelting independently, skipped the technological stage most civilizations needed centuries to pass through, and produced some of the earliest sophisticated figurative art anywhere on the continent. All without the written language or monumental architecture that history books have traditionally demanded before using the word civilization. The Nok didn't leave behind a story told in their own words. They left it behind in fired clay and smelted iron, buried in the ground, waiting for a tin miner and a century of archaeologists after him to start listening.